Ba 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 da bum bum ba da bum bum.
And our society should not be having to decide who's worth saving, who's not worth saving.
Yeah, yeah. It's not like we don't have the resources.
And what medication could possibly cost $19,000 for 28 pills? 21
And
pills.
the justifications for it are, I mean, so generally what you hear is, well, we have to pay for the cost of the development of the drug, right? Okay, I understand that, because the argument that's made as well, if you want new drugs like this, it costs money to develop them. There has to be a financial incentive. And this is where I'm like, if we can afford an over $1 trillion defense budget, we can afford to fund medical research so we don't have to pay $19,000 for pills, 21 pills.
Where is all this money coming from? You're spending $125,000 to Ukraine.
What's that?
Where's all the money coming from? We're sending to Ukraine.
I have no idea.
And there was an article in the paper, if I can find it, I'll bring it to you. I think it was last Sunday's paper. It's already gone in the trash. But it was about how not only is it a shame that we have to have these medical expenses for us, but the other countries around the world are living off of this because we're the ones that are doing the development.
And they
get the benefit, and they don't pay.
No. Yeah. They pay less for, yeah.
At some point, the insurance companies are going to say, stop.
Yeah. It's not a functioning system.
Okay, we'll get off our graphic.
No, it's worth griping about.
That's all we can do at this point. So.
Yeah, totally. We're gonna get started. Some of our folks, I think, are decorating the tree, so maybe they'll join us in a little bit. But considering this is the last session for this topic, let's get rolling now so we can fit as much in. Again, we'll pick up the first Sunday in February. We'll kick off with a biblical model of discipleship. That's the working title, and that's going to run from first Sunday in February up through Easter. Up through Easter is the plan. So that gives us 2 solid months to work on that, and then I'll figure out the topic after that at some point. So there's my plug. If you have any ideas of stuff to do that you want to do, basically into this, like leading into the summer, because that will be like our last hardcore topic. Because summer tends to be a little bit of a low period. But if you got any ideas what to do after Easter, shout them out to me. I'm always on the lookout for new ideas. Okay, so we're going to round out, and we're gonna look at several pieces of Leviticus and maybe Deuteronomy today. And this is more of just kind of a survey of the Levitical Deuteronomical stuff. So I'm gonna try to do a really quick recap, just kind of pulling it all together without going too much into depth. So foundation is the 10 Commandments and the Mosaic Law, right? And the Mosaic Law is established in the giving of the 10 Commandments, and that's where the Hebrew covenant is established. It gets broken with the golden calf incident, and then reestablished post-golden calf incident. And remember, a couple weeks ago, we looked at kind of that summary of things in Exodus 33-34, where God comes back in and says, just in case you forgot, here's what this was about. Okay, last week we spent a lot of time talking about what Leviticus is. And again, Leviticus should be thought of as ritual religious law, right? The book of Leviticus specifically describes the ordination and the establishment of the Levitical priesthood, okay? Who's the head of the Levites? Who's the first head of the Levites? No.
We weren't here last time.
Sorry, we didn't. Brother of Moses, Aaron. Aaron is the first head of the Levites, which is hilarious if you think about it. This is the same Aaron, right? They just threw all their gold at me, and I threw it into the furnace, and out came a golden calf. It's the same Aaron. But he's the head of the church. Just goes to show you that anybody can get ordained. So turn to Leviticus chapter 8. And we're just doing a brief look at what ordination of priests looks like. This isn't law specifically, but it's kind of an important. Well, we'll talk about it. So, first thing that you might notice, skimming through Leviticus 8, is who else are also ordained as the inaugural priesthood with Aaron. His sons, okay? Did you know that the stereotypical blessing that I say at the end of the service, not the one we're doing right now for Advent, but the Lord bless you and keep you, the Lord face shine on you with grace and mercy, the Lord look upon you and favor you peace. That's called the Aaronic blessing, named after Aaron, who gives it later. I think it's Deuteronomy we find that in. So Aaron's, famous. So Aaron and his sons are brought before Moses. And notice what is brought with them. Anointing oil, the vestments, the clothing, and the bowl of sin offering.
What is that?
We talked about this last week, okay? So remember there were 3 different sin offerings. One was for the whole congregation of Israel. That's the bowl. One was for a leader who sins. That was a sheep. And then
Goat or
sheep. And then one was for an individual, not a leader who sins. And that was a female goat, right? So the bull of sin offering is brought forward, which is a sin offering for all the people of Israel. And then you get 2 rams and a basket of unleavened bread. What might be the significance of the basket of unleavened bread? What's that about?
It's memory of the
Bing,
manna.
bing, bing. Yeah, it's a remembrance of the promise that God makes to God's people. Right? So as we're thinking about the establishment of the Levitical priesthood, these are the representations. These are the signifiers. This is the ritual that makes it up. So what are the things that are kind of being said? Just looking at this first verse. So first of all, it's the original Levitical priesthood is a family unit. I don't think read too much into that. They have special clothing, great. There's anointing oil, great. But in the establishment of the priesthood, the whole congregation, the whole community makes a sin offering. Okay, and they're called upon to remember the promises that God makes to them. Think about this as we read through this, because one of the things that I think is helpful here is to think about what role the Levites are playing here, okay? With the establishment of the Levitical priesthood, what job do they have? On surface level, it seems like they're just the ritual doers, but there's more to it than that. Okay, so they all assemble at the entrance of the tent of meeting, which is the tent where Moses goes into to talk to God and then comes out with his face glowing.
Hey, refresh my memory.
Yeah.
The Levites.
Yes.
They were one of the tribes?
Nope. So the Levites are the priestly class, the Levitical priesthood. The Levitical priesthood. We'll get to that in a second, or we'll talk more about that in a second. So Aaron and his sons, they come forward, they're washed, they get the clothes put on them, and it's kind of descriptive. It's a pretty nice getup that he gets that he wears. He's got a tunic, sash, robe, the ephod. The band of the ephod is put around him. What's the ephod? Does anybody remember? An ephod is a unit of measurement. Does anybody remember this? So there's a bit of a double entendre here. So an ephod was a measurement of grain, but it's also a tunic. Oh, it's not a tunic. It's like a yeah, it's a sleeveless tunic, I guess, that they wear, that the Levites wore.
What's
Okay.
the breastplate called?
Oh, I don't remember. Okay, but does anybody know what the Urim and the Thummim are?
Not a clue.
Yeah, this is some really interesting stuff. The Urim and the Thummim is theoretically, if I had a projector here, I would show it to you. It's the way that the priests divined God's answer to questions. So there was a white stone, and then a large white stone, and then a small white stone and a small black stone. And I don't know offhand how they did it, but think of it as the Levitical magic 8-ball. Which seems strange, right? I mean, if God is instituting this, if God can speak directly to Moses, why does God have to work through a magic 8-ball with Aaron? We're not going to get into this today, but I'm gonna bookmark that, because that's an interesting conversation. But anyway, and then he gets a turban, and then on the turban is a crown. So this dude is, as they say, dressed to the nines, right? He looks pretty important. And then they do this anointing of the altar, anointing of all its utensils, right? So the various accoutrements that go on the altar. Then oil is poured on Aaron's head. His sons come forward, dressed nice, but not quite as nice as Aaron. They don't get the crown. They have headdresses on instead. And then they bring forward the sin offering, and they slaughter it, and they do the sin offering. They sprinkle blood on the altar, and they pour the blood at the base of the altar, and they take the fat, and they do all the things. And it's literally as described, right? So I don't know if you remember last week, but they save the fat, that gets burned. Everything else, along with the skin, is taken and burned outside the camp in the pile of ash, as it was described. Then they come forward and they do a burnt offering with, well, it says, this is interesting, there were 2 rams, but now there's only 1 ram brought. Oh no, the first ram is brought forward. That's the ram of the burnt offering. This is a little bit, and it's kind of gruesome if you think about it. They do the dashing of the blood. The ram is cut into parts. The head is turned into smoke. So I guess they burn the head, and then all the fat's burned, and then everything else is taken, washed with water, and then burned on the altar. I mean, I don't know the significance of this, or if there is significance, but it's really kind of weird.
I'm sitting here thinking, who's cleaning up this?
Who's cleaning up after this? Yeah.
The women.
But then they bring forward the second ram, which is referred to as the ram of ordination. This is not what my ordination looked like, believe it or not. I did not have this.
You didn't have a ram?
No, there was no ram sacrificed on the altar. There was no ram of ordination. So this one is slaughtered, but then they take the blood and they put it on the lobe of Aaron's right ear and his big toe of or thumb of his right hand, and the big toe of his right foot. And then he does the same thing with the sons. What is going on here? And then they take the fat and they burn it and they do all the things.
Did the blood have special significance? I mean, so
Okay.
they hung up on blood.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that in a second. And then finally, they finish processing all these animals. More fat is boiled, all that stuff. We'll come back to that in a second, Kathy. Okay, now then, fast forward the 8th day, so a week later after Aaron and his sons, and we have another offering. So another bull, but a bull calf, another ram without blemish, and a goat, and a calf and a lamb, and an ox, and a ram. Holy cow. Like, we're just doing offerings. This is just, it's basically a barbecue. It's blood sacrifice non-stop. And so they bring all these things forward. They slaughter them. They take the blood. They dip the finger in the blood. They put the blood in the horn on the horns of the altar. Blood is poured out the base of the altar. Non-stop offerings.
I take it this altar is outside.
Yes, yes. This is outside the tent of meeting. Okay, and I'm skimming through this. Okay, and finally, at the end of all this, Moses and Aaron, after all of these offerings have been made, go into the tent of meeting together, and then they come out and bless the people. And it says, the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire comes out from the Lord, consumes the burnt offering, the fat of the altar, and then all the people freak out. No, they all fall on their faces. So, taking this at face value, this is weird, right? From a modern perspective. This is really, really, really weird. Okay. But let's attempt to process this a little bit. Okay. Again, last week we saw the establishment of the different sin offerings, right? So there was a sin offering for all the people of Israel. There was a sin offering for a ruler who had sinned, and there was a sin offering for an individual who had sinned. But then, if you recall, there was also sin offerings for if you sinned and had forgotten about it, but then realized it later, right? So, the primary way in which, in this setting, at this time, in this place, the primary way in which the people relate to God and atone for their wrongdoings is through this sacrificial currency, for lack of a better word, which goes without saying, from our modern perspective, it seems strange. Here's the thing that I think is really important to talk about in regards to this. Think about a time when you hurt somebody that you love, when you've done something wrong, okay? And it's not one of those times where you're fighting because you really want to pretend that you didn't do something wrong, and so you blame them for something that they did, and you go back and forth and you're petty about it. Not that I ever do this, but it's a case where you both know you screwed up, okay? How much does it take for you to know that they have forgiven you? Right? So maybe you've had a different experience than I have, but I love my wife very much, and she holds on to things. I do too. We're similar in this way, right? And so when I screw up, it takes a long time before I feel like we've moved past this, right? Even if she says she forgives me, it doesn't really sink in until a lot later, right? What I need is some kind of tangible evidence that she had that I'm forgiven, right? And then without getting into the idiosyncrasies of forgiveness and what that means, I need a sign. I need a symbol, okay? It might be a smile. It might be laughter. It might be, something as simple as her suggesting that we do something together, which says to me she actually wants to spend time around me again, even though I wasn't sure, right? Okay, now imagine you're extending that to, a relationship between an ancient people and the divine. Seems weird to us that they would be sacrificing bulls and goats and sheep and all this stuff.
But that's all they had.
That's a good way of putting it. That's all they had. I mean, currency wasn't really a thing for the Hebrew people. This is a a goods economy, so to speak. But also, how does the entire nation of Israel atone? Right? How do they know that God has gotten past what they've done? These are the same people who, and time is squishy here, but these are the same people who, not so long ago, may have created a golden idol, right? May or may not have been intentional, right? They messed up big time, okay? Okay. Also, The people that are being inaugurated as the first priesthood are the ones that were the ringleaders for the creation of the calf. Okay? So if you put it in that context, it kind of actually makes sense that the way that the priesthood, who we can think of as the go-betweens in this case, between the divine and the people of Israel, they who were the ringleaders for the golden calf incident, it makes sense maybe that there's this totally crazy round of sacrifices because, number one, they've got a lot of things that they need to make atonement for on a communal and an individual level. But number two, again, these are the people who are going to be, for lack of a better description, God's representatives to the tribe of Israel. Okay? So they're not only trying to start with a clean slate, they're trying to accrue some favor. they're trying to get some credit in the bank with the divine. Does that make sense? Right? Again, the way in which this mediation takes place is strange and foreign to us, but in an ancient setting, this is how they worked. Also, the is elaborateness a word? How elaborate it is significant as well. Kathy, you asked, what's the deal with the blood? Well, a couple of things. One is these rituals are elaborate because you're doing this for God, right? Okay? And the more impressive it is to the people, the more it feels like it's a legit thing, right? This is how we work, right? Why do we get up there and I parade around in a bunch of robes and wave my hands over the why do we some of it's tradition. I mean, and it has meaning attached to it. Don't get me wrong. I can give you a 4-hour lecture on the significance of every part of the worship service. But from an external perspective, you haven't been part of a church, it looks pretty weird, right? You should ask Daniel Hoffman about his perspective on this sometime. He's got a great kind of monologue about how weird worship is.
Well, any cult
Yeah.
that does things like this, it looks weird.
Have you all had the opportunity to either participate in or observe a traditional worship service in a different faith tradition?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like a
Nothing like here.
yeah.
Back when I was doing the high school students, let's see, one year we would go to a different church and observe. I'd go talk to them beforehand, and they were really impressed by what the differences were. Episcopal,
Yeah.
Greek Orthodox.
Oh yeah. Orthodox services are quite significantly different.
It's all symbolic.
And it's all symbolic.
Metaphoric and
Absolutely. It's all symbolic.
I've
But-
never understood the Catholics with this incense burning and
Greek Orthodox.
But incense is a pleasing odor to God from a ritual perspective. So incense in a lot of ways takes the place of the sacrificial burnt offering. Also, from a practical sense, it's medieval Europe, okay? You have just crowded a whole bunch of unwashed peasants into a church. This is potpourri, basically, right? This is deodorant. It's what the censors do.
Please do not have it in our church.
No. There's no matter what the St. Peter's Guild person tells, or St. Patrick's Guild person tells you, there's no such thing as hypoallergenic incense. It doesn't exist.
And with incense, you got the sight and the hearing and the
Totally.
there's a touch thing going on somewhere.
That's part of it too. Is the all the senses being stimulated. Yeah.
When Linda and I lived in Redlands, there was no Lutheran church around.
Mhm.
There was a Missouri church that we visited.
Yeah.
They said, well, you can't take communion because you're not a member.
Yeah.
Our girlfriend went to a Catholic church, and so Linda and I went to the with her to the Catholic church and talked to the priest, and he said, we said, can we take communion here? And he said, do you believe in God? We said, yes. He said, come on, you take communion.
No, he said, do you believe in Jesus?
In Jesus.
Yeah.
And he said, come on, you can take communion. And so we went to the Catholic church, how many,
For a year.
for a year?
This is the thing that, again, is, it's not shocking to me. Disappointing is maybe a word, but now granted, both the Missouri Synod and Catholic Church have contained within them a spectrum of theologies, right? There are progressive Missouri Synod and Catholic churches, and there are very conservative. But it's shocking to me, again, and in Fort Wayne, I was around a lot of Missouri Synod congregations, that increasingly we seem to have more in common with our Catholic brothers and sisters than we do with our Missouri Synod brothers and sisters. Who would have guessed that?
We went to a Wisconsin Synod one time, and I bawled
Yeah.
out.
When I was working in Tecumseh, my 1 year of engineering, one of my dudes there was a Wells member, nicest guy in the world, absolute nicest guy in the world, Gordy. And I remember having a conversation with him. I'm like, so does your wife, wear a dress all the time? Well, yeah. I'm like, what does she think about that? Well, just the way things are. I'm like, Gordy, you seem like a nice dude, man. Like, what's the deal? And he's like, well, it's what I was raised in. I'm like, oh my gosh, man. Like, there are better churches out there. Anyways.
Maybe Gordy's watching.
I doubt it. I doubt it. Maybe he is. Where was I? Oh, anyways, rituals from an external perspective seem strange, especially if you're not part of the tradition. Does anybody participate in like a Buddhist service of any sort? Yeah, shockingly similar in a lot of ways. But if you don't understand the significance of the words that are being said or the significance of the ritual, it just seems like random mumbo jumbo, right? So again, for us, this seems weird, but keep in mind, there are 3,000 years and many cultural changes that separate us from this.
Have you ever seen or heard of the significance behind the whirling dervishes?
Oh, I feel like I watched a short documentary on
Every
this.
movement
Is a prayer. Yeah.
And a tribute to the seasons and a tribute to.
It looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And nauseating, but it looks like a lot of fun too.
I don't understand how they don't fall down.
Well, it's the figure skater trick, right? It's keeping your eyes on a fixed point instead of because notice how they whip their heads around every time they make a full revolution. Yeah, that prevents your inner ear from getting all messed up.
But that's another strange way.
Yeah. Okay, so the reason I wanted to look at the ordination is because in Hebrew society from this point going forward, the Levites fill several roles, but kind of the two significant ones are, number one, they are the ritual go-between, right? They are the ones that do the things, right? So when you have to make a sin offering, you go through the Levites, okay? Later on, once we get the construction of the temple, some of these practices change a little bit. They get set in stone a little bit more, literally and figuratively. And it's no shocker, right, that the role of the priesthood changes over time. But it remains largely consistent even up through Jesus' time, right? The priesthood are the ones that are responsible for receiving the sacrifices of the people of Israel. That's one important role. So they do all the fancy things. They do Sunday morning, right? Sort of. But role number two is that the Levites are the ones who are also responsible for maintaining the story of the law. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant is held within the tabernacle, later within the temple. So even from a kind of figurative perspective, the fact that they are the ones that are the caretakers of the temple, and as you read through Leviticus, it then establishes how the temple how the tabernacle is to be constructed, what materials, dimensions, all that stuff. It makes sense that they are, in a figurative way, responsible for the keeping of the law, right? They are the ones that watch over the Ark of the Covenant, which simultaneously represents the presence of God amongst God's people, but also theoretically represents the physical form of the law itself. But they're also, in a more concrete manner, responsible for maintaining the law. So the Levites are the ones that are passing the oral tradition of the law from generation to generation to generation to generation to generation. Which, if we just look at the story of Exodus and Leviticus at face value, is hilariously ironic, right? It's comedic even. That Aaron, chief messer-upper of things, architect of the golden calf, and his sons are the ones who are then therefore responsible for caretaking the law for the history of for the rest of the history of Israel. It's like that kid who becomes a pastor and they're like, you? I got a couple of those when I went to seminary. No, I was never a bad kid. I don't know what they were so surprised about.
It's almost like they're being not punished, but you messed up. Now you're going to have to be the leader. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's also, what's the saying? Doctor, heal thyself, but psychologists are the most in need of their own. The reason you become a psychologist is that you're the most in need of. I don't know. I can't remember the saying, but yeah, generally speaking, you get involved in something because you're passionate about it, and the reason you might be passionate about it is because it affects you profoundly, right? So yeah, it make in a certain way it makes perfect sense. Now, here's something else is that is important to think about. And Kathy, you might have some insight here as well too. What are the mechanisms by which we maintain the record of law in our culture, our society? Right? We obviously have what we refer to as codified law. Right? What are the documents which govern the laws of our country? Constitution of the United States of America, which apparently somebody wants to rip up and start over again.
Don't go that way.
Right. What else? What else governs the Bill of Rights? Thank you. Bill of Rights. The Book of Amendments, well, not the Book of Amendments, but all the amendments to the Constitution, right? Similar to the documents that govern our church, which we're currently revising right now, updating them. They haven't been updated since 2006. Not my fault, but Milwaukie and I have been working on that quite a bit. Just can't do it all. So the church has a constitution, right, which describes the way in which we operate. We have a set of bylaws, which they're not necessarily amendments to the Constitution. They are, a whole other set of modifiers to it. How else is law kept? I don't mean in terms of application. I don't mean in terms of police officers and that kind of stuff. But how else do our laws kept within our country? Is there a living sense to our law as well? Right. Sometimes. And what is the mechanism by which our law is updated and altered? Supreme Court plays a big role, but even the lower courts starts out in the lower courts, and eventually it starts from a specific case, right, which might reveal a wrinkle in the law, might reveal a blind spot in the law, might reveal the way in which a law is unjust, right, due to a changing in circumstances. And so there's a mechanism, we don't need to get into the details of all that, this isn't necessarily a constitutional law day, but there's a mechanism by which the law is updated to match the ways in which the needs of the law are changing, okay? In a lot of ways, that's also what the Levitical priesthood does. Because keep in mind, the primary form is not necessarily a written form here, okay? Yeah, you could argue that, we start with tablets, eventually it's probably transferred to hides and papyrus and all that stuff, right? But the Levitical priesthood who literally memorizes the law and passes it on from generation to generation, are also responsible for updating it, right? As new challenges, new cases arise, because one of the major things to think about is this law is formed by a people in transition, right? They are wandering through the wilderness. How much does their world, their society change when they become now inhabitants of a land, right, with a temple. And now you have landowners as opposed to migrating shepherds, right? Absolutely, everything changes. And so the Levitical priesthood makes it possible for those laws to be transformed, transitioned, updated without having to go back to God every time and say, hey, what about this case? You know, what am I supposed to do? Because you know, Joey doesn't have any cows or sheep or goats. He's a what's the word? He's a merchant. You know, like how is Joey supposed to make sense? Does it make sense, right? So in the Urim and the Thummim seems kind of silly, but it's the mechanism by which if they need to consult the divine, they consult the divine. But really, it's their responsibility to make sure that the law is applied to unforeseen circumstances. There's a significance to this, which again is that the law, the biblical law, was never meant to be, this is a pun, set in stone. We start from the Ten Commandments, right? That's our foundation. You could argue that the Ten Commandments still is quite relevant, right? Without any alterations. But the Levitical law, even the law of Moses, was never meant to be fixed in place for all time. It was meant to adapt to the people, hence the establishment of the Levitical priesthood. Again, I'm beating a dead horse to a certain extent here, but so does it make sense then for us, 2,500, 3,000 years later, to go back to Leviticus whatever and say, well, let's see what this says with regards to internet ethics? No, it doesn't, right? It holds space for the idea that the people of God, both individually and communally, are going to change and transform over time. Again, you go back to the Ten Commandments for kind of like these wayposts of saying, what are the important things that we need to hang on to? And my analogy for how to remember that is, you know, the cross, right? It's all about our relationship with God, our relationship with each other, and our relationship with ourselves, right? These are the things that we need to pay attention to. And Jesus says it best, you know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. Boom. That's our foundation. We have to figure out how to apply that in each circumstance, okay? The power of something like Leviticus is we get to see how people tried to apply those very things in their circumstances. But remember, their circumstances are way different than ours. Okay, enough of that. So let's talk about unclean foods and animals. We got like 10 minutes left. I apologize. I totally got off track today, but it's okay. This is, you know, we're wrapping up things. So this is for me kind of the case in point of a changing interpretation of law, right? Because we are people who have varying dietary practices. Anybody in here that's primary vegetarian, vegan? Yeah, I know, Susan, yeah. Anybody in here that has specific dietary needs, right? Anybody in here that simply just does not like a whole genre? Like, you dislike shellfish or beef or not? Yeah, right?
And Joe tried to get me to sit in a beef chair.
What's the beef chair?
The cow chair.
Oh, the cow chair, I see.
Joe changed chairs for me.
Push it back.
Not really.
Push it outside.
But my point is this. Can you imagine Aaron, biblical Aaron, walking into a modern day restaurant and looking at the menu, assuming he can read the language and understand the currency exchange and everything? Can you imagine him trying to figure out what's okay for him to eat? Good Lord. All right? The world changes, right? And our dietary practices, all these things change. So,
And even looking at delis that are supposed to be kosher and follow.
oh, totally.
So sometimes they even offer on the side something that's maybe not as but it appeals to us Christians, so that brings us
Yeah.
into shop.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Times change, practices change. Okay, this is how we're going to round up today. Let's just look through at the things that are clean and unclean, because this is, you think you know, and you don't. Okay. Chapter 11, I'm starting at, halfway through verse 2. From among all the land animals, these are the creatures that you may eat. Any animal that has divided hooves and is cloven footed and chews the cud, such you may eat. What are these? Cows. Yeah, theoretically. Not a ton of beef cows in ancient Israel, though, believe it or not.
Camel?
What does this not include? Yeah, wait for it. Yeah. Horse, potentially. Yeah. Pig, definitely. Yeah. Camels, apparently. But among those that chew the cud or have divided hoofs, you shall not eat the following. The camel, for even though it chews the cud, it does not have divided hoofs. What does that matter?
But they have bulls, didn't they have cows? Did they have bulls?
Yes, you can eat bulls.
But I mean, didn't they have cows if they had bulls?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, but
Cows you can eat.
sorry, I would just say that's not the primary form of food. And we go straight from the camel to the rock badger. But for what rock badger? For even though it chews the cud, every badger that I know is an omnivore of some sort. And I don't think that they have 4 stomachs and chew cud in the way that, this is probably one of those cases where word does not appear elsewhere in the manuscript, best guess given by translators. Okay. It does not have divided hooves. It doesn't have hooves at all. The hare, you're not supposed to eat rabbits. Man, they're really losing out here. For even though it chews the cud, it does not have divided hooves. It is unclean for you. The pig, for even though it has divided hooves and is cloven-footed, it does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. Of their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean for you. What's going on here?
These animals had a history of spreading diseases.
Maybe. But why is the distinction about cloven or uncloven hooves or cud? Oh my gosh. Cud chewing or non-cud chewing?
Didn't they raise pigs, or did they not?
No. They're unclean. You can't touch them. Here's the answer. I have no idea, and neither does anyone else. I'm sure that there are books and journal articles out there where some scholar tries to explain this. But at the end of the day, there's something going on here culturally, contextually that makes sense to them, but does not make any sense to us. Here is case study number 1 as to why we aren't necessarily Levitical law followers. Okay? Keep going. These you may eat of all that are in the waters. Everything in the waters that has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the streams, such you may eat. But anything in the seas and the streams that does not have fins and scales, of the swarming creatures in the waters and among all the other living things, creatures that are in the waters, they are detestable to you, and detestable they shall remain. Of their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall regard as detestable. Everything in the waters that does not have fins and scales is detestable to you. That's pretty much a whole genre of delicious things.
In other words, turtles.
Yeah, no turtles, no scallops, no oysters, no clams,
But those are the.
no lobsters,
Those are the.
no prawns. Yeah,
Those are
no octopuses,
the ones
octopi,
that are.
octopods.
Aren't they the ones that are considered to be they clean the bottom of the ocean by eating the debris of.
And that's an interesting comment. That could be part of it, right? These are the bottom feeders, but there are fish that are bottom feeders. Catfish are bottom feeders. I don't see them ruled out here, but do catfish have scales?
No.
They're smooth. Yeah, bullheads. Those are the ones that we used to get in the river by the Alpena Power Dam.
Rounders don't have scales
Yeah, I
They're
don't
good
know.
food.
They are good food, yeah. So again, what's the rationale, the reasoning here? I don't know.
Well, but even back in our childhood, which goes back a little further than yours, we were always taught to, if we're gonna have pork, you gotta cook it till it's a hockey puck, because it's,
Sure,
you know,
trichinosis.
yeah. But
Trichinosis.
nowadays, you want it medium.
145 degrees is pork temp. That's a good
You want
pork
it
temp.
pink still.
Which my sister-in-law, I still have to cook hers until it's a hockey puck. She's deadly afraid of.
But it's all because we raise them differently.
But a well-cooked pork chop is a delicious thing if you are a meat
Well,
person.
she cringes when we should have a steak and I want mine well done.
Yeah. Hey, each their own. Each their own. Yeah. And it seems like the modern exception is always bacon. Bacon is the one thing that everybody's like, oh, well, I'm not a really big meat person. I eat bacon. I'm like, really? That's your thing? Whatever. Okay, and then we got the birds. These you shall regard as detestable among the birds. The eagle, the vulture, the osprey, the buzzard, the kite of any kind, every raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the waterhen, the desert owl, the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron, the hoopoe, and the bat.
Again, they are predators that eat meat.
Yeah, that might be part of it. And then all winged insects that walk upon all fours. Well, I'm okay with that one. But that means that they can't. But they can't eat locusts. But wait a second. Of them you may eat. The locust according to its kind, the bald locust according to its kind, the cricket and the grasshopper. Because John the Baptist, he lived on locusts.
Yeah.
Locusts and wild honey.
Good protein.
Why do they have focus on the 4 feet? How many insects have 4 feet?
None. Well, very few.
It's 6.
Yeah, it's six is it's the definition, isn't it? Of not arachnids, but I don't know. I'm not a biologist. And then to round out, you get a repetition of this, right? In verse 24, unclean animals. And the focus here is, again, similar to touching blood and other disgusting things, even touching an unclean animal, especially the carcass, means that you are ritually unclean. And it goes through, again, repeats, divided hooves, not cloven-footed, does not chew the cud, it's unclean. Any that walk on their paws are unclean for you. So no bears, no dogs. I'm okay with that. Again, the swarming, the weasel, the mouse, the lizard, gecko, crocs, no crocodile, no alligator. That rules out people from Louisiana. Swarming things, everything on which any part of the carcass falls shall be unclean as well, whether an oven or a stove. How many times are these people ritually cleansing their cooking areas?
Since you said Louisiana, if you've ever been to Louisiana, the fact is that if you don't eat the crocodile, it will eat you.
So here's the thing: is again to my earlier point, strange.
I know they don't have. Excuse me. I know they didn't have elk and they didn't have deer and stuff like that. But are those hoofed animals? Are they considered like ours?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea.
But they're good food.
Yeah, they are good food. I think deer would have been okay. I have heard the argument that you don't eat anything which eats other things, right? You only eat herbivorous stuff. But then why pigs? Now, granted, pigs can technically be omnivorous,
Oh, yes.
but goats can as well too. But goats seem to be okay, right? I don't know. I guess no, goats. We say that goats eat anything, but I don't think goats eat meat. I don't know.
They eat tin cans.
They will eat 10 cans, but they won't eat. I don't know about that. I think goats are pretty. I think that's more of a urban thing. But again, you get the point. Okay, fine. Okay, well, really quick. I thought I was going to go through purification after childbirth. We don't need to get into that. You know the ins and outs. But I just wanted to, again, point out the leprosy stuff. We'll wrap up with this because I just want to show that if we applied this ancient metric to a modern understanding, we'd have issues. So when a person has on the skin of his body a swelling or an eruption or a spot, and it turns into a leprous disease in the skin of his body, he shall be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons and the priests. The priest shall examine the disease on the skin of his body, and if the hair in the diseased area has turned white and the disease appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous disease. After the priest has examined him, he shall pronounce him ceremonially unclean. But if the spot is white in the skin of his body and appears no deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall confine the diseased person for 7 days. The priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and if he sees that the disease is checked and the disease has not spread in the skin, then the priest shall confine him for 7 days more. The priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and if the disease has abated and the disease has not spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only an eruption, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the eruption spreads in the skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall appear again before the priest. The priest shall make an examination, and if the eruption has spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous disease. Okay, here's what I find interesting for this, and actually the rest of it's really fascinating as well too. But here are my highlights. Number one, there's a process, right? It isn't just default. If you got something weird on your skin, you're out of luck. There is a seemingly medical process wherein the priest, not a professional medical professional, but the priest is responsible for declaring a thing clean or unclean. Teenagers with acne must have had a heck of a time. I mean, if you're already picked on for having, profound acne outbreaks as a teenager, but imagine these poor teenagers that got to go show up to the priest every time they get a new pimple on their face to make sure it's not leprous. Holy cow. Now, I say that, but I imagine that within society, they had an understanding of hormonal changes and their consequences. But again, basically, it boils down to this. If you get a weird skin condition, you come before the priest. They make an inspection, trying to determine is it on top of the skin, is it beneath the skin? They look at its physically, what it physically looks like. Then they wait. They have you come back. Has it spread? Has it not spread? Has it changed? But think about this, and this is what I find fascinating. This is roughly the same advice that you get from a doctor. If you show up to your doctor and you say, "Hey, I found this weird bump," what do they say to you? Come back in a week. If it's gotten bigger, if it's changed color, we'll take a better look at it. We'll do a biopsy. It's the exact same thing that they're doing here. Now, unfortunately, again, this is ancient medical understanding. What you end up getting is you get a whole lot of people who are not contagious in any way, shape, or form that fall into the category of unclean simply because they didn't have a profound understanding of what it meant. So somebody who has potentially a cancerous melanoma might be considered ritually unclean, right? Because it changed or it grew or whatever, right? Somebody who has psoriasis, right? Eczema, I don't know, right? Again, I'm looking at this at face value, but realistically, they might have figured out that these things are not contagious, and maybe they didn't. But then what happens is it's important to think about what's the personal significance of being declared ceremonially unclean. And it is this, okay? Now, it may have its roots in protecting the rest of the community from the transmission of what may or may not be a threatening disease. But it means that you, an individual who was formerly part of a family and a house in a community, becomes by default both religiously and civically, socially ostracized for the rest of your life, right? Again, it makes sense-ish from a practical standpoint, but thank goodness You know, 3,000 years later, we have a much more nuanced understanding of transition of diseases, of treatment of different medical conditions, and all this stuff. Not only because we are able to actually provide treatment. I mean, leprosy is essentially a gone thing, except in poorer parts of the world where they don't, unfortunately, have access to antibiotics and the tools that are used to treat it. But also because, by and large, we are not ostracizing people based on their diseases, except when we are. We started our conversation today with Carolyn talking about how much her medicine costs and how it is income prohibitive to be able to pay for her medicine, even with what the insurance is paying, right? Luckily, there was a mechanism by which you are able to get the medicine that you need to continue to survive, okay? The question that I heard asked was, but what about people who can't afford it?
Or don't get the grants.
Or don't get the grants? Is there that much of a difference from people not being able to afford medical care, from people being ceremonially unclean because of a lack of understanding about a medical condition and or the inability to treat it? No. I mean, it's kind of functionally the same thing. People who people who we have described as being disabled for a long time experienced ostracization in our society, right? Thank goodness for the ADA. Go watch Crip Camp if you haven't watched it yet. It's a fantastic movie that talks about what that is. We can point at a whole host of things. The AIDS epidemic, I mean, COVID, monkeypox, the ways in which our health, what's that? Mpox. Yes. Good. The ways in which our health and the things that affect us divide us and remove us from being seen as functional, healthy members of society. Right? So here's my closing statement. In a lot of ways, the biblical law, as we understand it, or as we've read about it, is outdated, right? It simply just doesn't apply to our circumstances. There are many, many things that are taken out of the context of the biblical law and used inappropriately, okay? But there are many things in the biblical law, not specifically the laws themselves, but the ways in which these people, our ancestors in many ways, sought to maintain a healthy relationship between themselves and the divine, but also amongst themselves. There are things in there that we can learn from, okay? And again, leprosy seems like a weird direction to approach it from, but here's case in point of a lesson that we can take to heart in the way in which our society functions about trying to do better by each other, right? They struggled with it in their world. We continue to struggle with it. And yet, what we're called to do is we're called to go back to that foundation and stick with Jesus' summary here. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself and seek to do good from that standpoint. So, don't throw out the biblical law, but also, read it with a grain of salt and understand the context that it comes from. That's always the most important piece. Okay, thank you so much, folks, for these 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks. I don't remember how long this took of study of this, and I apologize for ending late today, but we got started late. This was exactly how much time I had prepared, and it wasn't going to cut it short. So we'll see you in this context after January, after the semi-annual meeting.